Well, joining me now to talk more about the crisis in Syria and the chemical weapons question is Gregory Koblentz, a professor at George Mason University and a Stanton Nuclear Security Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
There's no concrete proof that Syria has used chemical weapons. To use the words of the White House, we don't have anything that's airtight, and the Syrians themselves today have denied flatly that they are using chemical weapons. So where does it stand right?
So there is some evidence that's been accumulating over time, primarily soil samples taken from the scenes of these incidents and blood samples taken from some of the victims of the alleged attacks. And presumably they've been analyzed in laboratories that show the presence of chemical weapon agents or degradation products. But the problem we have is that the chain of custody, the ability to trace where a sample came from and that no one tampered with it along the way, has been very unclear. And so that's been holding back the confidence of the intelligence agencies about how solid this evidence really is.
Right, I guess that raises another question. And there may be evidence of chemical weapons being used, but who used the weapons? I mean, it would be in the interest of the rebels to say that the government forces used it.
Yeah, this is a long-standing problem. These kinds of claims are very hard to investigate, very hard to get to the bottom of, and there's a history of opposition groups making claims of this sort to get international sympathy. But at the same time, it would appear more likely that the Syrian government has the actual resources to use these kinds of weapons as opposed to the rebel forces.
There is an organization called the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which has met in Amsterdam, and they came to the conclusion that the evidence that they've seen so far does not meet the standard that would require they work with the UN, that would require the UN to send in inspectors. And then but we do have Ban Ki-moon who's saying that we do want to send in inspectors. At this stage, Syria is not saying yes to that. So will this only be settled once those inspectors are sent in?
So because Syria is not a signatory to the Chemical Weapons Convention, the OPCW can't go in and inspect them as they could another state. So instead you have to rely on the UN Secretary General's authority to send an inspection team. The team's been ready for several weeks. They've been sitting in Cyprus and they haven't been allowed in by the Syrian government. So letting in this team to do an investigation to establish the facts will go a long way to clearing up some of the uncertainty and confusion about what's actually going on inside Syria with chemical weapons.
Right. What do we know about Syria's stockpile of chemical weapons?
Syria is one of the largest stockpiles of chemical weapons in the world, estimated at several hundred tons of agents such as mustard, sarin, and another nerve agent even more lethal than sarin called VX. And they also have a range of delivery systems that they could use to deploy these weapons, ranging from Scud missiles to bombs to artillery rockets.
And the other danger, of course, is that a stockpile like this, as you say, it's a very large stockpile, could fall into the hands of the rebels. And a number of those rebel groups are not exactly friendly or sympathetic to Western interests or Israeli interests, for that matter.
Yeah, since the beginning of the uprising, the security of the Syrian chemical weapons stockpile has been a major focus of the U.S. and of Syria's neighbors. And the risks are that these weapons could either fall into the hands of rebel groups, or the Syrian government could pass them along to a group like Hezbollah or another proxy group. So concerns that these weapons could be either transferred or stolen or just lost in the confusion of the civil war are major concerns for all of Syria's neighbors right now.
Right, and what are the options for the United States? Suppose chemical weapons have been used and there is concrete evidence that they have been used. What does the United States do?
If there is concrete evidence, I think one of the first things the U.S. is going to do is try and rally international support for greater efforts to end the civil war in Syria. I think at that point it'd be harder for the Russian government to continue backing their ally in the UN Security Council. So I think you'd see more multilateral action, and I think you'd see more assistance to the rebels as well from...
And this would include military action?
It's possible. I mean, there are a range of options that could be adopted. I don't know if that would be the first choice, but that clearly stays on the table as the U.S. builds a greater international consensus that more steps need to be taken to end the violence in Syria.
And I guess that won't be as easy for the United States to do, because some of those rebel groups actually have affiliations to groups like Al-Qaeda.
That does complicate the situation where some of the groups have this affiliation, and so the U.S. and its allies in the region have been trying to work with groups that are moderate, that don't hold those views, but it can be hard on the ground to be able to tell them apart.
Okay, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.